Kiri Masters, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Thank you, John. Great to be here.
Bobsled Marketing. Start me off with the origin of the name. How did this name come about and the company in general?
You know, I think that people can really overthink the name of their company as a form of resistance, and they're waiting to come up with the perfect name. That wasn't the case for me. I looked around my living room. There was a toboggan installed on the wall that was like a wedding gift from a friend. And I was like, a bobsled. It's like it's a competitive sport, and you got to, push someone along and get in. It's fast paced. I'll think of some cool tagline later on. Right now, I need to register in an LLC. So bobsled it is.
Bobsled it was. And this marketing agency had a unique twist because we've done interviews with founders of marketing agencies before. Your agency had a very unique kind of offering. Describe it.
Yeah. So we worked with CPGs and physical product companies, apparel, electronics, things like that, on their Amazon sales channel. And then eventually Walmart.com, Target.com, Instacart, etc. So these were brands who were very familiar with selling wholesale to Best Buy or to Target, but the whole online world, especially Amazon back in the days of 2015 when I started the company, was the Wild West. It was unknown. It was, there's a lot of stigma around Amazon at the time that it was a used bookstore. And so these, I would speak with luxury beauty brands like, we're not selling our luxury lipstick on Amazon. That's where people buy their toilet paper. We're not going to be in the same shopping cart as that. So there was an evolution over time. What we did was, as brands sort of became aware that, well, maybe someone else is actually selling our products on Amazon, we need to take ownership of our brand on that channel. We would work with them to help get their product information correct and converting really well. We would run their advertising for them. We would help them navigate all of the weird rules and restrictions and policies and things like that.
And it's like
as well.
The Wild West on some of these platforms, right? Like,
yeah.
I bought a book for my kid, the new Scott Galloway book, and on Amazon, and it came and it was empty. It was like the cover of the book and just empty blank pages inside. It was some fraudulent seller that had sort of somehow gotten a hold of this cover of the book, and I ended up being duped by it. So that's a silly little example, but this is it's the Wild West. Like all of these resellers, and for people who buy just stuff on Amazon, it's hard to decipher between the proper brands versus the knockoffs versus all the fraudulent stuff. I mean, I'm assuming you guys helped the good actors appear like good actors and proper branded companies.
Yeah, exactly. And as a brand, navigating all of the rules and policies is very challenging as well. And there's things that happen which are obviously wrong, and then actually trying to get them corrected and navigating the Byzantine, ecosystem of Amazon customer support. Like if you have a little bit of experience and you know how things work, then you have an advantage. And that is the advantage of working with an agency in those contexts, is that an agency might be working with hundreds of other brands. They've seen it all before. You're working with someone who can ask their colleague, group of colleagues, hey, has anyone seen this before? And chances are they have. So oftentimes within these CPG brands or product companies, the e-commerce team is really small. They're stretched really thin. They're selling across different websites and D2C and other retailers. And understanding how all of those retailers work and how all of the advertising platforms work, that is a big, big job. And you can have a really smart person that is just not feasibly able to be an expert in all of those things.
Yeah, and this makes total sense, because I think a lot of people say, well, like, why do you need an agency? Why don't you just have your marketing manager buy your search terms or whatever? But this gets to the idea of just the sophistication, complexity, the shared best practices across. How did you structure your business model? Like, how did you make money?
Yeah, so essentially, clients would pay a monthly retainer. And generally, if we were managing advertising for them, which we were most of the time, they would pay a percentage of their ad spend as well.
So it was a dual payment. So
yeah,
like a monthly retainer plus the ad spend percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And what was your retention rate like of the companies? Like once you got a company on a retainer, how was your retention of those clients?
I believe at the time that I exited, it was around 9 months. And
9
that
months.
wasn't, 9 months across the whole client book. I wasn't very satisfied with that. I knew that it could be better. And it was, over time, I guess to share a little bit of the journey, I had to start working with really small brands because they were the only ones that I didn't have any credibility with the big CPGs. I eventually, worked my way up in terms of having the company present as credible and trustworthy and capable of doing these things. And eventually we did start working with bigger and bigger brands. But, these small companies, some would kind of struggle and we could do a great job and bring them a lot of new business, and they would have cash flow problems or some other kind of issue. So sometimes, an agency business is, it's challenging in terms of numbers of fires to put out every day. There's you've got a lot more employees than a software company or other business models. Got a lot of clients, and at any given time, someone is unhappy. So it's, that it's hard. Of course, we did the best that we could, but it is hard to make everyone happy every hour of the day.
Yeah. But it's interesting how you daisy chain, because some people, they do the opposite. They say they go whale hunting, right? They say, I want like the one anchor client. I want the big brand, and then I'll kind of expand from there. You did sort of the bottom up, the more grassroots approach, which I think is fascinating. So working with smaller brands to medium-sized brands to eventually to the kind of global brands. Was that something that you just sort of fell into, or did you intentionally build a business with that idea?
John, I didn't have a choice. When I got into this industry, 2015, it was the first Prime Day ever. This is obviously Amazon had been around for a lot longer than that. Things were very basic, but I walked in to being an Amazon consultant with hardly any credibility. I had this little e-commerce business that I had built on the side as a side hustle to my corporate job. And so I knew a little bit about Amazon. I'd tinkered around myself. I had a couple of experiences with friends running friends of friends Amazon accounts, but I didn't have any network. I didn't have any credibility. And the only way I could get clients, was to offer on a pure contingency basis and say, I'll take a percentage of sales, which I got burned pretty seriously by that business model, as you could expect, especially with small brands. But I had to start somewhere and get my feet wet and work up the credibility ladder, because I didn't come from an agency and I didn't come from the retail world. So it wasn't really a choice. It was just a necessary first rung on the ladder.
It's funny, I make a habit of looking at the LinkedIn profile of all of our guests because I'm just curious about their journey. And I have to say, your journey is one of the most unusual journeys I've ever seen. Really? Because you have the logo of a giant bank on your LinkedIn profile. I think it's JP Morgan Chase. Is it JP Morgan Chase? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So do you know how odd it is for me to interview someone who's worked at JP Morgan Chase? It's really, really odd. It's a unique background. And I'd be curious to know, what was the biggest misconception that you had about entrepreneurship while you were at JP Morgan Chase? Because my understanding is while at Chase, you did some work on the small business market. I mean, you thought about this space. You, as an executive, as a banker, you had some opinions about what small businesses did and didn't do, et cetera. What was the biggest difference when you actually got into running a company?
Oh, listen, I'll admit to eating a big old slice of humble pie, because I looked at these clients that I had while I was a small business banker, and what it gave me. I actually came from the corporate strategy side. I was like a marketing and strategy person, And then when it started to dawn on me, hey, maybe I want to like do my own thing one day. I purposefully took a sales job in small business banking so that I would have more exposure to small business owners. And then I also got this amazing credit training. So I learned more about balance sheets and P&Ls and what was necessary in terms of cash flow to service debt and how banks looked at providing credit. So that was a really great experience and great education. I ultimately saw these clients and they came from all different backgrounds. This was in Brooklyn, New York. And, many of them didn't have bachelor degrees. They came from a trade. They came from all different kinds of backgrounds. And I thought, if these guys can do it, I can do it too. There is not a magic business owner gene or a magic background. I can do it. And, that first year that I was in business for myself, I did think, this is harder than it looks. But it did really help my confidence to look around and say, I could do this. I think I have some background that would enable me to figure this out.
What was harder than it looks, though? I'm just curious from a clinical perspective, an academic perspective, looking at a business. And then when you actually got in it, which part did you find harder than it looks?
Oh, getting clients. So I think a lot of my peers in the agency world come from other agencies. And so they come with some credibility. They have some past clients. They can call up and say, hey, I've set up my own shop. You like me and trust me. We did good work together. Take a chance and come on board with me. Or they come from that industry. So a lot of people in my space were ex-Amazon executives. And so they had the credibility of, well, I'm an ex-Amazonian. I know how it works. I might even know people on the inside who can help get things done. I didn't have that. So that was, that was the hardest thing, was working up that ladder of starting with these teeny tiny brands that really didn't want to pay my invoices to like getting to a position where things were a little bit more stable.
But you did get to work with some incredible brands. I think Panasonic was on your client list at one point, and some really quite established brands.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, we worked with some good CPG brands that you would know.
Yeah, consumer packaged goods. So as you look at the business now in the rearview mirror, and you've had this successful exit, can you point to the biggest value driver, the strategic decision that you took that really helped you build the value of the business? Because a lot of these things, and you know this, Kiri, I mean, a lot of people that do what you do are really nothing more than freelancers, right? They, they put out their shingle and they say, yeah, I can help you with your Amazon ads and your Walmart, but they don't build a company. They're really self-employed. You did the opposite. You built a real company with millions of dollars, like a significant company. What was if you could distill the most important strategic decision you made along the way?
There were a few things, but the most important and the thing that set Bobsled apart when it came time to sell was our reputation in this space. And that came about through a big investment over time in putting out educational content about how things worked, how this process at Amazon works, what are the best practices here and there, commenting, doing commentary on changes to policies and regulations. And candidly, it was like pretty much me doing that stuff. So, but that was my job. And I felt like that was a differentiator in the space. A lot of other agency owners would be putting out fires all day, being the butcher, baker, candlestick maker, and they would just not make time to do this. And I looked at it the other way. I said, that's my sort of superpower. I'm going to spend as much time as I can there and try and build a team that can take care of all of the other things, because that I saw that as being very valuable as a differentiator.
how did you, you know what, I'm going to come back to it because when we get into the sale, I'm curious to know how you minimize the risk to the acquirer that your personal brand would accrue to them. But I want to come into the discussion about the acquisition, and then we'll get to that question. If I forget to ask it, remind me, because it's a critical one. You mentioned there were a couple of strategic decisions. So one was investing considerable time in building your reputation in the marketplace, your personal brand, and so forth, your thought leadership. Was there a second that you think came to a close second in terms of the strategic decisions you made?
So this is not so much strategic, but I really have to be clear that I was in the right place at the right time. Amazon in 2015 is not what it is today in terms of, accounting for 50%, more than 50% of all online sales happen on Amazon. That wasn't the case in 2015. And so I was fortunate to enter at the right time where there wasn't a lot of credible solutions out there and become an expert quite quickly, so that today it's just a no-brainer. You're starting a brand, or you of course you're going to have an Amazon sales channel. It's just not even up for debate. But back
equally,
then it was,
though, the big agencies now are either acquiring or building out in-house talent, so it's becoming a more mature market. There isn't that like a business on the side. Exactly,
and I think that you could look at that in a fatalistic way, like, oh, Kiri got lucky. Like, she was in the right place at the right time. But there are I do want to impress upon people that there are so many things happening right now that could be at the very beginning. So, I hear this about TikTok Shop. That there's so many like little germinating things happening right now, which could become something big. And rather than like walking right into a red ocean of competition. And like you mentioned, there's a lot of really, really big agencies, and they work, all of the Fortune 500, they all work with an agency. And those agencies, they don't want to let anything go. So once something becomes an opportunity, they will build out a practice area around it. But it takes a couple of years for them to cotton on to an idea. So that timing and being early on something was, I can't take all the credit for that, but I think it is something that's worth considering for entrepreneurs, is what can you be early on?
Yeah, it's this idea of the glass 3/4 full. Like, yeah, we can all look and and wallow in all the change that's going on and feel terrible about that, but also obviously in all changes there's opportunity, and the great entrepreneurs seize that.
Yeah.
How big did you get this company in terms of number of clients, number of employees before you decided to sell?
Yeah, we were at about 40 employees when I sold Bobsled, and just over 100 clients, I believe.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So this was a substantial business. I'd be curious to know, at what point along your journey did you start to contemplate selling? Like, do you remember if there was a trigger or something that made you think, oh, maybe I'll sell this thing?
I drove my husband crazy. I was flip-flopping on this for years, and he was like, I'm sick of hearing about this. I'm going to support you no matter what you do, but you got to make a decision. I'm tired of having the same conversation every 6 months. So I did eventually get serious about it. It was a couple of years there was a lot of acquirer interest. I would have inbound interest come through because it was a hot space at that time, and there wasn't a whole lot of agencies that appeared big enough to be worth acquiring. So I got quite a lot of inbound. I would consider this one, and I'd talk to them, and that ended up just being a big distraction, because they would, just dealing with onesie twosies is not very efficient. So I did decide in summer of 2022 that I definitely did want to sell the company, and that was because I was getting a little burnt out. I was I wasn't working crazy hours or anything, but I couldn't really see couldn't really see what the next step would be. I just knew that I didn't want to keep running this business for another 10 years. And I didn't see at the point that it was at like it was a good business. It was strong, but I couldn't really imagine bringing on a credible CEO who would actually take everything over. And so I viewed an exit as the best way out. So I could eventually move on and do something else.
What was it that made you draw the conclusion that bringing on a CEO was really not tenable?
I wasn't making enough profit to excite someone who would be a real game-changing CEO. That comes with to bring someone on. They're expensive, and I would be happy to pay that, but I also felt like I would still need to, quote unquote, manage the CEO. And the only clean break I would ever get would be to sell it. So I was like, once I've done that, I don't want to have, I wanted a clean break. And I was happy to work toward a clean break because I knew that once I sold, I would have some obligations. But I wanted to be working towards something.
I think this is such a fascinating insight because I think there are these forks in the road, or these moments, inflection points, to use a terrible buzzword, but where as an owner you have to decide, are you going to take the next giant leap that is going to have some short-term impact, probably detrimental, to get to the next. It's like I used to play Frogger as a teenager. I used to play this video game called Frogger, and you'd have to kind of get across the road, but you'd have to sort of miss the cars along the way. And so like this is one of those moments where hiring a CEO would probably suck up all your cash flow.
Yeah. And time, a lot of time.
And tons of time, not guaranteed. Mm-hmm. It's the right decision intellectually, but it's more risk. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a really great point. So I may have gone through as much trouble to recruit and hire and have a 50-50 chance of it working out with a CEO, or I could sell it. And it seemed like because I was getting all this inbound interest, it seemed like a better shot to sell it.
So what did you do? Like, did you hire an M&A guy? Did you take it to market yourself? What was your process like?
I did. I hired an M&A advisor, which was a great move. I paid them a lot of money at the end of the day, but I would not have got the great deal that I did without them. And interestingly, the acquirer, like two years on after the deal, they're like, we really didn't like your banker. I was like, I don't care. Like, he was working for me. He wasn't working for you. And you know what's wonderful with that situation is I showed up on day one of my W-2 job working for the acquirer without any of that like animosity animosity is the wrong word, but there was some tension during this deal and negotiating things and going back and forth. I get to come in as the golden girl, like come in with the brand new business and excited to get things done. And I didn't have any of that tension that they would have had with the banker.
It's really smart insight. It's kind of the good cop, bad cop. Like your M&A banker, if you set them up to do this, they can be the bad cop and leave you insulated from that and protect your relationship. Because usually any service business in particular, but certainly marketing services, there usually is some sort of earn out or equity role where you're becoming an employee for a while. But we'll get to that. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the process. So they marketed the business? How many potential acquirers did you talk to? How many kind of made an offer? Give me the funnel. Like, what did it look like?
Oh, yeah. So the one thing that I did when I was looking for an advisor was a person or an outfit that had experience in my category. And that was something that my contract CFO really impressed upon me was don't just go with any old broker. You need someone in the marketing and communications agency space who really understands the business. They also have the Rolodex of potential acquirers. And so that was really, really good advice. So they came with some prospects, but it wasn't emailing a list of 2,000 prospects. It was two guys who'd worked decades on the buy side of agencies. And so they knew who could this agency fit with. It's probably not going to be everybody, but like, here's our sort of credible list. And I brought all the people who had reached out to me over the years, and other people other companies and people who I thought might have an interest. And I want to say we got the list to about 20 potential acquirers. So it wasn't huge. It wasn't hundreds. And that was actually when I was interviewing M&A advisors, for some, it was their point of differentiation that they would email 2,000 private equity groups to source a deal. And that, I mean, maybe it's different in other industries, but in mine, I'm glad I went with this route. More curated. Because
just go further there, because some people listening to this would say, like, I mean, competitive tension, you want as many people bidding on your business as possible. Why wouldn't you want to shop it to 2,000 potential acquirers? Just walk me through your thinking as to why you wouldn't want to do that.
Well, one is a type of potential acquirer. So a private equity is going to be looking at solely at the numbers, more or less. And I had a good business, but it wasn't this, ATM machine. It was a strategic, but it was in a space where other agencies, very few agencies had a credible offering in my space. And while it was profitable and it was a good business, the real value was in the position of the company and the expertise of the team and people who had been doing that job for 7 years and knew Amazon inside and out. And that whole package, it had to be a strategic acquirer. A private equity company would have valued it at 3 to 4 times EBITDA, which just wouldn't have been interesting in terms of a transaction. Going to a strategic was the only, I wouldn't have considered anything different.
So you your research was that a private equity group was sort of in the 3 to 4 times EBITDA range. Did you get any sense of what a strategic acquirer might pay? Like, what kind of premium were you seeing any ranges that looked better than PE?
I got some really terrible offers as well from strategics. I'm not going to lie, but I had my number in my head that I wanted, and it was a premium multiple. Because I knew that I had a good business that was going to be valuable to the right company. And so that was another piece of advice that my M&A advisor gave me was multiple of what? Like, an EBITDA can be manipulated in so many different ways as well. It's not, think of the number at the end of the day and not just the EBITDA as the way that we're going into this.
So as you approached it, you had a number in your head as opposed to a multiple. Like you said, I want to walk with this number.
I want to walk with this number. And it was informed by what I understood some of the previous transactions to have been in my space. So it was informed by that. It wasn't like a plucked a number out of thin air that was unreasonable. It was, it was something that also my M&A advisor, like, they're not going to work on a deal where the seller is like completely unrealistic in what they want. It's going to be a giant waste of time for them. So together we sort of came to agree that this number was credible, and that's what we should shoot for.
And so it sounds like you did share that number with your M&A professional.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Were you worried that, when you talk to a real estate agent and they ask you, well, what do you want for your house? And you tell them the number, miraculously, the offers somehow, even though they're acting for you, come in within like plus or minus 1% of what you told your broker. This happens a lot. I'm wondering was there any trepidation, or did you ever get the sense that you'd put a cap on the value of your business by telling your M&A professional your kind of dream number?
I understand that concern, but honestly, no. I cried in front of these guys half a dozen times. Like, this was an intensely emotional journey as much as anything. And they had to talk me off the ledge. such a significant decision and process. You have to have complete trust in who you're working with. Obviously, they are incentivized, and getting an extra $500,000, may or may not be worth their time. But I feel like I needed. We were partners in this. They got a cut of it at the end of the day, but we had to really be in tune with what I was willing to accept from a financial perspective and what I was willing to accept from a personal perspective as well.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I'm curious, what brought you to tears in the process?
Oh my gosh, what exactly brought me to tears? It ended up being so there was some false starts, and you want to believe that things are going to go off without a hitch, and that the acquirer sees what you see in your business, that I've got the wonderful team that is super competent and they're going to do a great job. We've got clients that are going to stick with us. But for an acquirer, and it's not that they're potential acquirers, they need to come on a journey to understand that too. And so you kind of feel like you're always defending your business and the choices that you made. And I made a lot of choices that made sense for me. And like, I was back in Australia because of COVID, right? And that was, and we had this remote team. That's how I built the company, and it ended up being a strategic advantage. But then for some acquirers, they thought that was going to be too challenging for them. They couldn't really get around it. And so I had to defend this international hiring model. And it gets very exhausting. You kind of get ground down a lot. And so it's just a very emotional process. I can't remember exactly what brought me to tears, but it was, there was a bit of that.
You mentioned the 20 companies on the short list and a couple of really crappy offers. Can you, without the name of the company that made the crappy offer, describe what a crappy offer looks like? So somebody who's never been through this can quickly discard what a crappy offer is.
Well, it was the number at the end of the day, and it was equally frustrating because my advisor told this acquirer in no uncertain terms, this is the number. And they came back with half of that number and like a really big salary. and we all looked at it and that is not what we said we were interested in. And it felt so offensive because I'd spent a lot of time with that acquirer as well. And they did the whole dog and pony show about this is where you'd fit in. And they met, bobsled's president. And like, we were starting to talk about, how would we fit in and come back with this crappy offer. And that is something to consider as well. I know we're going to talk about structure of the deal as well, but, getting paid a big salary, you're going to think about the tax consequences of that and how everything is set up in your particular situation. But like a big salary was not a suitable solve for me.
What was your reaction? Like, how did you react to the low ball?
The person, not the corp dev person, but the business executive on the other side wanted to speak with me. And I just didn't respond. I was so miffed that they had just wasted my time. We'd told them what we wanted and they had insulted me. I don't know. I don't like to think that I hold grudges, but in that situation, I definitely did.
You literally just didn't call him or her back.
I didn't respond. I did not respond. I had to move. Also, I had to move on. I had to move on to
How
the
did you
next
know
one.
it wasn't just like their opening salvo and they would have like gladly increased it if you'd asked?
So, the benefit also of working with an advisor in this space is they kind of know the types of players. So we talked before about private equity, really interested in the bottom line and less so in the strategic side of things. So then, in the agency ecosystem, there is a whole sort of cast of characters. You've got the holding companies that are publicly held,
Intercom
really,
and all those guys.
Yeah, IPG, Publicis. So those are, they have hundreds of agencies and they are publicly traded and they work with the Fortune 500. And so that they have a certain way of looking at things. Private equity has a certain way of looking at things. And then you have in the agency space, you have some quite large independents that are backed by private equity, and they have a certain way that they look at things. So, when we got this offer back for the advisor I was working with, they weren't completely shocked, but it's the other player in the mix, interestingly, was some software companies, which I didn't really expect. I mean, some of these companies were on my list because they had sort of floated things out there when I had spoken with them. But actually, there was a couple of software companies that ended up being quite serious contenders because software has much bigger multiples at exit, very profitable. But once they get to a certain size, they're also looking to grow through other revenue models too. And so some were actually looking to add on a managed service capability to support their software business. So in this case, my agency might come in and we sort of provide the white glove service for their software product, or we're also a source of new client acquisition for them, or vice versa. So that was interesting too. And the software companies were pretty good to work with, actually.
I'd be curious to know. So you've got 4 buckets. You've got private equity, very numbers based, 3-4 times EBITDA. You've got the agency holding companies, giant publicly traded companies, and they've got their formula. And you've got private equity backed mid-size agencies. And then you've got this 4th bucket of software companies. I mean, if you could broad stroke describe the different offers and from each of those types of people, like what are the kind of major drivers of their offers? How are they different?
Yeah. So,
like in your experience, like I'm assuming you got offers from some of those types of people. Maybe just share those.
Yeah. So they were all like, for the most part, the software companies were more generous in their offers. The holding companies were, I would say, just quite inflexible because they go out and they have whole teams of people whose job it is to go and look for agencies all the time. And they're looking for something that there might be trends. In this case, it was retail media and Amazon are, looking for something to add to their portfolio around that. But, the way that they would structure that transaction, I mentioned, like, we'll make up the shortfall in the sale price by giving her a big salary. That is how a lot of agencies are acquired, because like their best option is to sell to a big holding company. And I don't know, maybe I was also like a pretty small fish for a lot of them. And maybe they just didn't put really that much time into it. They may not have taken it that seriously.
How did the different acquirers that you spoke with view your personal brand? And we were talking about it earlier, and I wanted to table it till now, but let's talk about it, because you built a significant personal brand in this kind of retail advertising space. You were well known. On one hand, that's great, free marketing and a great way to acquire customers. But of course, I would imagine acquirers looked at that as a bit of a liability, saying, but I mean, if we acquire Kiri's company, like we lose her and a lot of the value goes out the window.
Yep. It was a double-edged sword for sure. One, I would not have even been on the map if I hadn't built a personal brand. So I wouldn't have even been in that room having that conversation to begin with. Could I have built Bobsled a different way through partnerships, advertising? The answer is no. Like, I didn't have any money. I just had time to like write some blog posts and film some YouTube videos. So I don't know. I don't see. And also, I want to be clear. It wasn't just the Kiri Masters show. I did make a very concerted effort to develop people in the company to go out and be thought leaders as well. I published a book with one of my colleagues. We co-authored it together. We would produce research, and it was always me and one of my colleagues, and we would do the webinar circuit and all the podcasts and stuff, and we would do it together because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just me. Now, in practice, that is challenging also because not everyone wants to do that kind of job. Not everyone is excited about it. And people move on too. Unless there are golden handcuffs, those people can leave and they can take their reputation with them, which is exactly what you're asking me about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did you retain those people that you propped up with such great brand credibility? I mean, did you give them options or any sort of retention bonus?
Candidly, I didn't keep them all. They did move on. But we did everything as bobsled. And so in a way it was, okay, it's less about the person and, not completely, but as much as possible, it became about bobsled rather than, Mr. X at the end of the day. Now that is not perfect because people generally want to follow people rather than companies. And it's a game of business is personal at the end of the day. But as much as possible, I did elevate the company and my colleagues and the work that we had done for clients and our, roundup from our experts about Prime Day insights. And so it wasn't, just reliant on one person. Yeah. So you do as much sense of that as you can. So how did they think about the risk with me? Well, yeah, that at the end of the day, and this is very common with agencies, there was an earnout for all of those deals. And there wasn't any
the earnout tied to?
In most cases it was tied to EBITDA performance.
Mm-hmm. How were you able to, in the deal that you accepted,
mm-hmm.
How did you protect yourself? We've heard on this show many times that an earnout is hard to reach because the parent company, the acquiring company, grafts unusual one-time expenses on the P&L. How did you kind of handle around that? Or did it happen to you?
It didn't happen. The company I sold to was great. Ethical. They did what they said they would. They have a reputation to uphold as well. And word gets out when, you sell someone your company and they shaft you. And I had spoken with people in my space where that had happened, and I was aware of all of that too. It's still a leap of faith at the end of the day. But a couple of things. One is just from a legal standpoint, I worked with a great lawyer who specialized in M&A, try and get as much of that as possible into the agreement to begin with. And that there was, a period of time each year that I would be able to review the P&L and dispute anything. And there was arbitration processes in that earnout agreement. So as much as possible, get everything in there to protect you against frivolous expenses or not getting the investment in marketing that you might need to reach those goals or anything like that. The second is that I found the earnout targets to be very approachable going in. So
what percentage growth were they looking for on the earnout? Like, are we talking 50% growth, 10% growth, just to get a sense?
Less than 50%.
That's a big range. So you deem them to be realistic.
I deemed it to be very realistic. Yes.
Okay. Comparable to your growth rate before the sale. Like it didn't,
exactly.
It wasn't an exceptional.
It wasn't an acceleration. Was not
Got
an
it.
acceleration. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And I spoke with some other companies that they had acquired also. So that isn't always going to be possible. And in my case, this company I sold to had acquired a couple more before me. They proactively said, hey, go speak with, these people, and they can tell you what we've been like to work with. So that was very helpful. It's not always possible in every situation. The company you sell to may not have acquired anyone before. So yeah.
Let's go back to the actual offer itself. So how many offers did you get? How many letters of intent, like formalized offers, did you get?
Formalized letters of intent, probably only like 2 or 3.
Okay.
Because some of them were like just informal,
right. Email exchanges or verbal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. But you got 2 or 3 more formal. What was your reaction when you saw the formal letter of intent?
I was so happy. It was like, there's still a ways to go at that point, and it's not a done deal. But to finally, after it would have been, 7 years of running that company and putting, so many sacrifices, both financial and personal, into that business, and then to see a number on a page, which to me was very significant. It just felt so good. It felt such a reward to have something that I had poured myself into be valued in that way by someone else.
What can you tell us about the structure? Like, was it like it sounds like there was a cash component, an earnout component. What else did they sort of do to structure it?
Yeah, there was some cash up front. There was like a pretty substantial amount in the earnout. There were guaranteed payments made out over a series of a few years. And there was incentive units, which is not technically a type of equity, but you could call it that.
Kind of like a phantom equity. Structure of some sort.
Yeah.
Got it. So I understand cash. That's good. I understand the earnout, as we talked about. The guaranteed payments. So these were payments that were just structured over time. They were guaranteed as much as they didn't require you to do anything. It wasn't like you had to hit a target to get the guaranteed payment. Right. It was just a time-based payment.
Exactly. It was just a way to spread out their payment over time, so they weren't paying so much upfront. Got it.
There
wasn't any like note. I mean, there's a seller's note, but that not any interest associated with that.
Okay. And with the earnout, was it one of those earnout structures where it's like you hit it or you don't, on you go, or was it sort of shades of gray? Like there were ranges of different outcomes that you could achieve?
That's a really good question and a really good point. So there was, this, it was very collaborative to come up with this between the acquirer, my M&A advisor, to figure out what would happen if we didn't hit it in year 1, could we make up ground in year 2? And that was very important because we had some costs that we knew were going to hit in year 1, and everyone was aware of those. And so it was collaborative to say, look, if we don't hit it in year 1, could we make up ground in year 2? That made me feel so much better about the deal and my ability to sort of get what I was anticipating. Ultimately, it didn't need that. We hit both targets. But but it was huge peace of mind, and I'm very grateful to the acquirer for being like open to considering that, because at the end of the day, we both wanted the same thing. We both wanted things to really work out and for everyone to feel like it was a win. And for us, like, Bob said, coming into that company to contribute in a significant way. And fortunately, they could be flexible in how long it took for that to transpire as well. They were very understanding.
Got it. Yeah, it's a really important point. I hope our listeners really underline this, because some are now structures. I've used the analogy. My son's a downhill ski racer, and if you've ever downhill skied, and certainly a slalom course, you have to take a very high line. And if you ever get low in the line, you may make one gate, but then the next gate you're done, right? So you've got to always stay high. And what you're describing here is like, if you miss a gate, the race is over. Like if you miss an earn out threshold in some structures, there's no opportunity to make it up. But it sounds like in your case, you had an opportunity to make good on that, even if you missed in year one. And that was an important negotiating point, and really important for our listeners to learn from, for sure. Well, I'm so glad that you shared the story. Are you up for a little lightning round of questions before I let you go?
Of course. I told you before the show, I've listened to at least 100 episodes. I am so grateful for what you've put out with this. It was an amazing resource for me during this period of time. So I'm all about it. Let's go.
Oh, that's super generous of you to say it. It means the world to me to hear you say that, because that's what we're trying to do is help from folks. So that's great. So let's jump in. In terms of slimy tricks, I think we've heard of one. The acquirer kind of lowballed you after you'd invested a considerable amount of time. Were there any other sort of slimy tricks or things that acquirers sort of tried to, pull the wool over your eyes, given your naivete about the process?
No, there wasn't any other slimy tricks. No. What about the kind of biggest mistake? If you could roll back the clock and do the whole process again, what might you try to do differently? So I was this ended up not being consequential, but at the time when I first entered into the process, I was quite sure I wanted to stay in Australia. It was like immediately post-COVID, I'm like, life's pretty good here. We don't have anything to worry about. And so I went into some of these discussions. And I was like, look, I'm not coming back to the US. And that was that would have hurt my chances at the end of the day. And eventually, after sort of discussing it a bit more with my family, decided, like, look, for us to get a really good outcome here, we're going to need to go back to the US. So that was something I really should have thought about a bit more in advance, and like really reflected on what I was prepared to do there, because I may have turned some potential acquirers off by saying that up front.
Being so rigid, saying no. Yeah. It's like you don't want to put a bunch of barriers in front of a deal until you get into a deal, right? Until you get an offer, and then you can start being a bit more strict about it. That's really good advice for sure. What about the high emotionally? We talked about getting the letter of intent feeling very validating and satisfying. Were there any other sort of emotional sort of highlights as you think about the process in retrospect?
Yeah, actually, if I can talk about a low light, and this is something that I know it's come up on your show a little bit, and I'm very transparent about this, is the first time in my life I suffered from clinical depression after the sale.
Really?
And this was a surprise and disappointment to myself as much as it would be to anyone else. I had everything that I wanted in life. I had, just done this big transaction. I had money in the bank. I had a wonderful family and a great marriage, and like everything on my life wish list. And it's incredibly common for founders to go through this after a sale. Unfortunately, I don't think it's spoken about that much. but it came as a shock to me. And I also want people listening to this to be aware of that, just how common it is. It's statistically like 7 or 8 out of 10 people who sell their companies end up with some like period of depression afterwards, even if everything goes your way. So that is, I know we're going to get to later on, but like that's something that I am sharing about my journey, because I want people to understand that, that dark side of it.
Yeah, it's common, but in your case, so surprising. You seem like such a positive, outgoing person that I'm, on the surface, it seems like you could never feel down, but obviously this is a different ball of wax. This is a huge life-changing event. How did you get out of it? What did you find helpful in terms of pulling yourself out of that period?
Yeah, I work with a psychiatrist, and I went through a whole journey. I think it's a completely different podcast we'd need to talk about it, to be honest. But I sought out, I'd sought out medical help, and that helped me out.
Yeah. I would like to have that podcast at some point, because we've certainly had it come up. We've actually talked to a few people who are trained psychologists in that and deal with it, have seen it and studied it, and it's a real thing for sure. So congratulations for coming through that, for sure. You've already been super generous with your comments about Built to Sell Radio. It means the world to me. So thank you for saying that this show helped you. But were there any other resources, people you followed online, Instagram accounts or YouTube channels that you could point our listeners to that would help them understand how to sell a business successfully?
Yeah. So I read Built to Sell a number of years prior, and that was very instructive in setting up the structure of the business. And even though I was the face, I had a wonderful lieutenant, Julie, who ran the whole company, and I was just the face. So I don't know who had the harder job there. To me, I had the easy job.
Julie.
To me, I had the easy job. To her, she had the easy job. So it's it's horses for courses there. So the other resources I really valued. I listened to Finish Big by Bo Bellingham.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 times in the car. Be dry. I just listened to it over and over again, letting everything sink in, because that also talks a lot about the emotional side and like how are your employees going to feel about this, and what is some of the both the positive and negative experiences people have been through when they share that news and acclimatize to their new life as well. That is a very important part of it.
That's the book. I was speaking over you at the time. So the book is called Finish Big by Bo Burlingham. Bo is a famous author in this space, former editor-at-large of Inc. magazine, wrote Stake in the Outcome with Jack Stack and many other books. But this one is a real gem. It's one of, I think, his least well-known books in some ways, but in really, really good books. So it's called Finish Big. Yeah,
that was a Bible for me, for sure, during that time. And then another one, which is probably flown under the radar for a lot of people, but I found very valuable when I was first trying to navigate, do I sell this? Do I bring a CEO on? What do I do? It is called Before the Exit. And the authors of that are Dan Andrews and Ian Schoen. And this is it's very short. It's a series of thought experiments about, hey, do you need to sell? Could you bring in a CEO? Could you, selling is an option. It's an option I obviously pursued, and I'm glad that I did. But actually going through this and thinking through, what are my alternatives here? Are those attractive to me? What else could I do? If you ultimately decide to sell, you don't have any regrets because you already thought through all of those alternatives and sat down and really reflected on it. So I do recommend that to people, to think quite deeply about whether this is the right path for them.
That's super. Okay, we'll put that one in the show notes at Built to Sell as well. I hesitate in asking this because I know trophies don't make people happy. And I know there was a period where you were not happy. But was there anything that you physically bought yourself to commemorate the success of your journey?
I love the question. I love listening to people's answers to the question. It bums me out to say that I didn't buy a trophy. For a period of time, I was sort of more of an insight into my like inner life here, but I was obsessed with sailing. And so I thought, I'm going to buy a catamaran. I'm going to sail like around the Caribbean. This is going to be like, I'm going to live on a boat and homeschool my son. And my husband was like, yeah, I'm not getting on a boat. So I was like, okay,
torture.
New boat or new husband. I guess I'll just forego the boat. So
just in your dreams, the catamaran remains in your dreams.
Yeah, maybe over the summer instead. But also, I mean, we had to move over, from Australia to the US, and there just wasn't really a moment to like buy something that I would want to take with me.
Do you think you'll move back?
No, actually, we're getting our green cards, so we're staying.
Congratulations.
I was totally wrong about wanting to stay in Australia. So yeah, I'll own that one.
There you go. A green card is your new reward. Let's call that your trophy.
It's costing a bit of money. So,
Kiri, where can people find out about you? I know you do a lot of work on personal brand for folks. So if people want to reach out to you on social, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Just look for me, Kiri Masters. And then if you go to my personal website, kirimasters.com, that's where I'm sort of sharing a bit more of my personal journey of the story. I'm doing like experimenting with this podcast. It's sort of biographies of people who've made it to the top and their sacrifices along the way. And then, as you mentioned, I'm also doing a little bit of personal brand coaching for people who want to sort of, get the exposure that they should really be getting for their ideas and their experience, and helping them to get themselves out there a little bit more.
That's awesome. And we'll put all those links, kirimasters.com, Obsession, the podcast, and your LinkedIn profile in your show notes at builttosell.com. Kiri, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, John.